Welcome everyone to today's Real Training for Free session. Nick Cavalancia here, sitting in for Randy Franklin Smith. Over the last, I don't know, I want to say year and a half, we've done a number of webcasts that were educating you on things around identity. Sometimes it's around privilege escalation, sometimes about identity itself. And there always seem to be lots and lots of questions about multi-factor authentication. And so we were sitting there having a conversation about what should we be doing next, and really thought it'd be a great opportunity to talk about MFA. There's a lot of cyber attacks that are happening today where MFA is now a target. We've even seen literally analysis of threat groups that used to do a lot of SIM swapping, as an example, trying to do things where they could get access to basically someone's phone by doing SIM swapping, and instead go, you know what, let's just try to go after MFA instead. Let's try to figure out ways to bypass it, or to find resources that don't utilize it, or something. And so we really wanted to have an opportunity to take some time to educate you about kind of the current state of MFA. What are the limitations of it? What are ways that people are bypassing, I should say people, but threat actors are bypassing it? And what are some of the countermeasures you can come up with? So we're really kind of excited about this topic. I'm glad you're all here. We have a ton of you actually registering for this. It was almost 1,000 people, so it's really good. It tells us that we're right on time here. And so what I'm going to do first is just kind of thank the folks at Silverfort for sponsoring today's webcast. And I, as always, am joined by someone from Silverfort. In this case, it's Yiftach Kashet, and Yiftach is the VP of Product Marketing. So Yiftach, thank you for joining me today. I appreciate you being here.
Pleasure to be here as always.
Yes, and for those of you that have been on webinars before, sponsored by Silverfort, you're very familiar with Yiftach's depth of understanding. So don't be fooled by the product marketing title. I'm laughing myself because I was VP of marketing for 3 different tech companies, and I've been in tech for 30 years doing this stuff. So I sort of laugh because people think you don't know anything, and he knows quite a bit and has a real good grasp. So I'm really glad that we have a chance to go through this together here. Actually, before I do that, a couple housekeeping items that I always need to cover. One is that today's Real Training for Free session is being recorded. And so if you have to drop off early and want to come back and watch the end of it on the recording, you'll be able to do that. We'll send you a link in a couple of days, or if you want to share the link with a colleague and they can see it, so on and so forth, you can feel free to do that. You'll be getting that recording link in a day or two. So look for that. Secondly, as always, I have the Q&A box here up and open in front of me at all times. And we like our questions here to be as interactive as possible. I'm a big believer that when you ask a question, it's probably better asked contextually during a presentation than waiting for the very end for Q&A. Yeah, we're going to have some Q&A time at the end, but it's sort of secondary for only those questions that maybe either didn't have a context with what we were talking about at the time during the presentation today, or maybe something where just when it finally popped up in the Q&A box, we sort of moved on topically, and it would be kind of difficult to go back, and so we'll answer it at the end. But other than that, we want you to make sure that if you've got a question, a thought, a comment, an opinion, an anecdote, whatever it is you feel like sharing, stick that in the Q&A box. Omar's asking here, case in point, Omar's asking, can you give me the names of the presenters' names and titles? So Yiftach Kashet, in fact, and I can't jump ahead of my slides, but Yiftach Kashet is the VP of Product Marketing at Silverfort. And my name is Nick Cavalancia, and I am your host. I'm a 4-time Microsoft MVP, and have been doing this a very, very long time. So Omar, I hope that answers your question. Also, if you take a look at the PDF, I believe that Yiftach's name is in there, and you'll be able to get his spelling there as well. All right, so let me see. Anything else from housekeeping I need to cover? I don't think so. So anything else, just stick something in the Q&A box. If you're having problems with audio anytime during the presentation, it doesn't happen very often, but what we found is because we're using the computer-based audio, you can just go on your GoToWebinar player or client there and switch to like a phone call, even though we're not taking phone calls for this, and then switch back to computer audio. That tends to take care of most people's audio issues. So hopefully that doesn't happen today. I'm going to start today by talking about just the architecture of MFA, what it looks like, just kind of level set everybody, so they're not just thinking it's an app, right? That's what they use, an app, because there's some people here that are new to cybersecurity. There's a lot of people here that are 10 plus years and beyond. So for those of you that are very familiar with it, bear with me a slide. But I'm just going to make sure everyone's level set here. I want to talk about the ways that MFA gets implemented today and kind of talk about the evolution of it a little bit. you'll see that in the couple of bullets that I've got for that slide, there's a deviation from security entirely, where it seemed like the vendors went straight to to usability and productivity, and then realized they really screwed up the security aspect of MFA, and then kind of came back and rolled back their changes. And we'll cover some of those things, and then talk about just some examples of attacks that included bypassing MFA and how they did it, just at a very, very topical level. Yiftach is going to cover in far more detail exactly how things are happening, some of the inhibitors to MFA that keep it from being useful, and so on. And so they're going to be doing more of the deep dive. I'm going to be doing more of the topical. And then I'll provide some recommendations on how to better secure logons when MFA is utilized by organizations. So again, as we're talking, if you all in the audience have questions, comments, anecdotes, thoughts, opinions, whatever, stick that in the Q&A box. Yiftach, if I may, while I'm doing my presentation, if you have any thoughts, feel free to interject. I may even throw a question your way or so, but would love to hear from you up front as well. Is that fine?
Works for me.
Great. All right, awesome. So here we go. So let's start with just the idea of why is MFA even in use? Like, why do we need it? And I'm not trying to go like MFA 101 or really in the weeds, but I just want to make sure that everyone's thinking along the same lines, the logic of why we even have MFA. So you take, like, let's say a password. You have a username, of course. We assume that username is that's the credential. It's the username. I'm gonna be logging in as admin for the sake of argument. The password's establishing that it's the right combination for that username. It's the password that establishes I have the right credential in the first place, meaning the right username. They match. Cool. That's what we've used for the last, I've been in this for 30 years, so the last 30 years plus, right? And so, but there's a difference here with MFA. It's trying to establish and affirm who the owner of the credential is, meaning, are you the one that's supposed to be using it? So think of it this way. If, let's say, we have a username of admin and a password of password, just run with it. It doesn't really matter in this case, right? So if I type in admin password, I get in. But then I share the password with Yiftach, right? And he types in admin password, he gets in. The system has no idea who the actual owner of who's supposed to be assigned this. Like, what person in the organization is supposed to have this or not, right? And Brendan, would you respond to Michael's question about no longer hearing and ask him to swap his audio for me, please? But the idea of MFA is there to go, well, okay, great. I got the ID and password. That's cool. I'm glad you gave me that. That's awesome. But are you really the person that's supposed to be using it? Because I have some definitions, some attributes that define who the person is that's supposed to have access to this. Are you them? Okay, he says it returned. That's good. Glad you're back, Michael. Welcome back to the party. And so that's where MFA really comes in play. It's affirming the owner of a credential. And where this really becomes, Yiftach, did you want to add something? I'm sorry.
Yeah, if I may. So I just want to follow up on what you said. I think it's important to zoom in and say that when you think about a cyber attack, I think the part of the identity where an attacker, where, as you said, suppose I'm the attacker and I put the username admin and the password is password, when this activity by itself has zero deviation, zero anomaly versus the standard behavior. No, unlike data exfiltration, unlike any other part in the standard cyber kill chain, the identity aspect, that when you provide username and password, the technology, the infrastructure has literally zero capability to discern between the malicious and the benign. And this is why the affirmation of the owner, okay, that happens outside of the system is so important.
Love that. And for those of you that are going on the path of like, wow, but what about like if it's a normal time of day and day of week and which system they're logging in from and an IP address or the inside, outside the network, that's not part of just regular authentication. That's like zero trust or something else that's monitoring authentication, which we'll talk about today. And which brings me actually to my last part here about why using MFA. You think about this idea of we have to affirm the owner of a credential, the owner. And that's where things like zero trust comes in play. Zero trust isn't about really so much granting the permissions to, let's say, I usually use the example of like if you were a database admin, you get a job at a company and they grant you all the database admin privileges to all the databases and servers you need, and they assign it to your account and then you log in. There's this trust that exists that when you log in, you're actually you and you get access to all this stuff. Zero trust lays on top of that. Well, is it actually you? And certainly MFA does some of that as well. Zero Trust takes it even a step further, but I'm just trying to use that to kind of drive in the point of where MFA plays a role. Zero Trust then looks at things like, is this the right time of day or day of week or system, and all those other things I talked about before, those other attributes as well that could be considered here. And then would decide you're actually you, I'm going to let you in. And then on top of that, then you have concepts of like zero standing or just-in-time privilege that may say there are no privileges, but once you've validated that you're the owner of a credential, I'll grant you the privileges. That way, if a threat actor finds up some sideways way of gaining access to your credentials, there are no privileges associated with them. And so all these things kind of still rely back on something like MFA to validate that the owner of the credential is the user of the credential. And that's why MFA is just so really important. And it's going to continue to be even more important as we move forward. You have to talk anything else before I jump ahead?
No, feel free to jump.
Awesome. So state of MFA, just real quick, couple of stats, just really quick, not going to belabor the points here. This is from a report done in December of last year, so it's not too far away. It has a 2023 moniker on it, but it's just a couple months back. 93% of orgs still use passwords, which makes sense. We all do. And I don't think there's many organizations that are passwordless completely. So that kind of aligns with this stat here. Second one, only 22% are using phishing resistant MFA. And by phishing resistant, the assumption here is, we're going to talk about MFA prompt bombing in a little bit. I'm sure most of you are familiar with that. And the idea here is that someone can't just try to get someone to respond with that they're using their app and whatnot, or provide a code, that sort of thing. So it's phishing resistant MFA. And then, but 52% of organizations have been a victim of a password attack. So the overarching idea here is just like, not everybody's using MFA the way they should, or using MFA at all. And a lot of organizations have been victims of password attacks, meaning at the end of the day, if we go back a slide, I'm not going to, but think about it visually back a slide. If all we're doing is double checking that the username, the password, authenticates the right username, then you're going to end up having a lot more of these password attacks that you see at the right here, and that number goes up, if you will. So I want to show you, I actually have the wrong images here. I forgot to make these white. Oh, well, ignore the stuff that's kind of grayed out or, kind of hovered over, or, kind of blanked out a little bit, and just look at the things that are bright. I forgot to make my changes to my final slides here, but this is actually NIST's architecture, and I want to kind of show this to you in pieces, and I forgot part of this thing over here on the right. So just pretend you can't see it, or put your hand over your screen. I'm just teasing. But anyways, you start off with a user, and the user is basically, from an MFA perspective, is an applicant. Says, I want to enroll in MFA. I want to add on some authentication factors when I log in, so that you can verify that I'm the user, or excuse me, the owner of a credential. And so there's this digital authentication platform that exists. That could be it could be a single sign-on platform, could be something that's just a third-party MFA plugin that utilizes on top of Active Directory. It could be whatever it is, but it's something that's going to do that verification, that extra step. It's what's actually going to be doing the verification of the MFA. And then there's this idea of enrolling with a credential service provider. So this is where, again, either it's the same authenticator or it's a tie-in, some kind of API that's plugged into Active Directory, and it's a mix of the two. But the idea is then there's an enrollment, and the enrollment is there where we're doing those things that are necessary to verify that in the beginning you are actually you. We've seen things like, did I put MAF? Someone said Huari. Did I put phishing resistant MAF in the last slide? If I did, I meant MFA. I'm sorry, I'm not making up a 3-letter acronym. So apologies there, everyone, if I mistyped. So the idea here with this enrollment is, those of you that have seen various types of MFA, sometimes it's nothing more than like, here's your token, and maybe using like Google Authenticator or Microsoft Authenticator or some other vendor's authentication app, and it says type in the number you see here or scan a QR code. I've also seen other things where they have security questions that get asked, even validating your ID with things like ID.me. There's lots of ways this enrollment processes happen. But whatever the nature of the attributes, the validations that are necessary, those things happen. And then basically an issuance takes place and says, okay, great, I'm now associated. Let's just stick with something like Google Authenticator. I now have those digits, that particular instance of Google Authenticator, and assigned to your account, and then they become a subscriber to that service. All right, so that's the idea. So now we have this subscriber that is now known to the digital authentication in the lower right-hand corner. That's the one that says, okay, I know who you are now. Every time you come in, as long as you authenticate, I know who you are. And so then you have somebody who wants to use a resource of some kind. It's the same applicant, by the way. It's just they're considered a claimant now. They're going, I'm admin with the password of password again. I'm admin. I'd like to be verified. And so you're making a claim. The system yet doesn't know at this point, because again, I have my stuff grayed out. Apologies again there for it was supposed to be white, so you wouldn't see it at all. It's totally sorry there. But I'm making a claim. I'm admin. Goes, okay. So we have to do the process of authenticating them. And the authentication there is with the MFA, it's password, it's any of the additional authentication factors, everything that's necessary to go, okay, that's actually you, and I recognize you as that subscriber to the digital authentication, meaning it's, again, the applicant, subscriber, and claimant are the same thing. It's just what role are they playing at the time. When it's applicant, I don't even have MFA. Once I have MFA enrolled with my user ID, I'm now a subscriber to the digital authentication provider. And when I'm trying to log on next time, I'm just a claimant until it validates me and says, oh, you actually are the subscriber. Okay, you are the owner and the user of the credential. Cool. So all three of those are the same thing. It's just what role are they playing at which point in time. And then there's a session that's established. And then the reliant provider, meaning like whoever has the actual resource, they actually may do some authentication assertion themselves where they're going to validate on their own. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's simply, I've let you log into Active Directory and I validated you, and now I know that you're the what I say before, the database admin that's going to go do database administrative work. Great, I've authenticated you. Go forth and be productive in Active Directory, and we stop. And then whenever you access a resource, that thing in the upper right, it doesn't double check anything. But there are additional controls that are put in from certain platforms that will have the reliant provider. Could be Microsoft in general, could be a particular application. They might do their own authentication assertion as well to go, is this actually them? Do you validate who these are, who they say they are, and as an additional step. So this is how NIST looks at it. This is a revision 3 that came out in 2020, hasn't been updated since then. But let me just check here. We're seeing Andrew's talking about a lot of Azure Enter ID MFA prompts seemingly generated by failed logins. I'll talk about that in a little bit, another slide, but I will talk about that for sure. And Carl's talking about interesting how Google Authenticator is functional when the phone has no internet connection. I have not noticed that, Carl. Carl says that Google Authenticator works even when there isn't an internet connection. I know in the new iPhones, there's for like 911 calls, even if it says no bars, it'll supposedly, I've never called 911, but it's supposed to work. So maybe it's something along those lines, but I have no idea. So before I jump ahead and go to the next slide, Yiftach, anything you want to add just to the architecture here? Any variants, commentary? And if not, it's okay, but I thought I'd just ask before I move on.
No, nothing substantial. I think, again, I think NIST are doing an amazing job, in framing and standardizing what a secure MFA should be. I do want to, raise a flag, do a spoiler. Basically, this would apply to a web-based MFA, mostly.
Yeah. And I was trying to find something that would apply generally, and then obviously the stuff where it doesn't exactly apply, like the reliant provider and that kind of thing on premises. So that's why I tried to declare, but you're 100% correct. All right, let's keep going then. All right, so here's the evolution of MFA. This is sort of in a practical sense, meaning like, what are we actually interacting with? And we start off with 2FA years ago. And if you look at the sub bullets under 2FA, you see credentials, you see like a token or a cryptographic ID device or biometrics. And that was all that something you know, something you have, something you are. And then MFA, of course, was just used more than just, one of those. The password being one factor, one of those being another factor. And then we saw it evolve over the last couple of years, probably the last, I think, about 5 years or so, where we started to see more federated identity. And I'm calling that someone you know. That's not an official one. That's just me I'm sticking with these something you know, something you have, something you are. I'm like someone you know. And that could be something like, for example, if you go ahead and log in over here into this platform. I've seen it many times with Google where I'm trying to log on to a device. It says, great, open your phone, go to YouTube, and then give me the code from YouTube, because I'm logged in on YouTube, that kind of thing. And so there are these other ways, if it's use another provider, that's sort of the federated identity mentality there. And then there's also been an advancement that follow the identity assurance levels within the definition of NIST 800-63. And that's to do with the self-asserted assurance levels. That's the stuff where like you're claiming here's the password and those kinds of things. There's remote verification and in-person verification. And there's actually really kind of very interesting use cases for in-person verification that are not in person with MFA today. And so like, as an example, you take the biometrics idea of like something that you are, and you go get your phone and you can do like your thumbprint, or you have the Face ID type of thing. I have an Apple phone, sorry, that's what I'm using, but Android, you have something very similar. And so those things, of course, are something you are, but that's not in-person verification. So how do you do in-person verification, that level of identity assurance, which is the identity assurance level 3, when we're not going to have people come here? Everyone's hybrid and stuff, right? That's not likely. There's some very interesting apps that exist now for MFA where instead of like scanning your face, it'll literally take a video and have think of like a video call, but it's watching the video of your face, and you're doing this live, and it goes, look up, look left, blink twice, smile. That's like the same thing as being you're here. I'm telling you what to do, and live you're doing that for me. Now, if we all think ahead, could AI kind of cheat that? Probably, maybe with a monitor, like put the phone against a monitor and have an AI doing those things, maybe. But the idea is that those are things that are becoming very interesting for MFA, so it's evolving. And then here's this this I don't know, sidestep in MFA that happened like 2 years ago that got fixed. And this is one of the questions that came up earlier about someone saying getting a lot of failed logon attempts within their MFA app. And this is where vendors started trying to go, this is really a lot of work. People are having to like get a notification on the phone, open up the app, they're having to get a 6-character code or something or other, and they're going to have to go type it in, and users are complaining. So we need something simpler to find that balance of security and productivity. And so it came down to like a, yep, that's me button, right? Just validating that it's me. And if you all think about that, and hopefully you know where I'm going with this, the idea here would be that's great for usability, it's great for productivity, it's horrible for security, because we started having MFA prompt bombing. And what that means is it's kind of what was insinuated in the question earlier, where bad guys will try to log on repeatedly. Let's say they get your credentials through a phishing attack. They spoof your Microsoft 365 and they get you to log on, and you're too dumb as a user to know that when they put you like, oh, I can't access the file on the web, and you go, gee, it must have been a real file, I guess I'll just forget about it. Okay, good for you. But you've done all that, and now they see that there's MFA involved. So what they do is they try to log on you at 3 in the morning in an automated way, I'm assuming, and they will keep doing it over and over and over again. So you keep getting woken up at 3 in the morning until you finally go, yes, fine, stop, and you hit, it's me. So it'll just go away. And that's the idea. And so this was a real left turn here for MFA, because it actually made it less secure. And so you've seen all the vendors, even like Microsoft Authenticator did this as an example. They had just a yes and no. It's me, no, it's not. And what they did to modify that was put up a two digit code, and then the yes, it's me, no, it's not me buttons. So that way you have to type that in still. You still have to provide something back. And no, it's not 6 characters, but it's at least 2 characters, and you have to type those things in still. And that also means that it has to be in session. It'd be very difficult for somebody, this is out of session, who just goes and prompt bombs you. Prompt bomb, that's tough to say. Prompt bombs you, and you just put yes, that's out of band. But in order for you to provide the number 77 that pops up on the phone, you got to be in band. And so it's impossible for the threat actors really to do that without doing, I guess, some more social engineering or something, but it'd be really tough. But the bottom line is, even with all these evolutions, these are evolutions in trying to find this balance of security and productivity, as well as how do we create methodologies that are meeting the need of the identity assurance levels. And I'm going to talk about needing multiple levels a little later on in the slides here, but we're pretty much still just with tokens and apps no matter what today, because that's the usability factor that's there. Yiftach, anything you'd add here to either the evolution or where we stand today?
Well, I think as a rule of thumb, usability is the nemesis of security, right? You want to make life easy for people. For example, I think the best example is SSO, right? You want them to log into every resource with a single username and password. What happens? you get a single point of failure. Same goes with MFA, right? You want it to be an easy, seamless, non-intrusive security control, okay? Then the bad guys take advantage. Now, problem is, how do you counter that? You make it less seamless, right? I mean, like I'm working in a cybersecurity company. We have MFA. When we log into our machines, boy, do I hate it, right? It's always a trade-off, and I agree. Like I think as a general rule in security, and specifically here, like finding the right balance, between a usability level, that is sustainable yet not too much vulnerable to attacks. I mean, this is really something I think all security vendors or end users are trying to reach.
Yeah, two comments here I wanted to address here. Robert said the salespeople, I'm assuming he means vendors that are trying to sell him MFA, will tell me that MFA is going to save us all from the evils of the web. Oops, maybe not true. And I think it's a bit of both. You heard Yiftach and I are both big proponents for MFA. It makes a lot of sense, but it is important, and this is why we're doing this today. It's important for you to know where it's going to fall down, so that you can put some compensating controls in place, or maybe implement MFA the right way, and so on. And then I also forgot, Robert mentioned here, I was even thinking when I was talking about, somebody had mentioned earlier about how the Google Authenticator works with internet access, and I was being stupid. And Robert's spot on. He goes, because they, or sorry, Finn said, because they have their rolling codes synced. And I was like, oh, of course they do. That was dumb. They use an algorithm to keep changing the codes, and it matches up. So they never have to have internet access for that to work. So that was dumb of me. I'm totally not even thinking here. So let me share just a couple of slides. I'm going to hand things over to Yiftach in a minute or two. Just a couple of examples of attacks that have bypassed MFA or figured out a way of getting around it. We've seen there's threat groups that have actual platforms. They have phishing as a service platforms like Greatness and Tycoon 2FA, and they have built in some really good technology that does reverse proxying. So the idea there is, it's not just let me prop up a page that looks like Microsoft 365 or a Google Workspace or whatever. It's actually letting you go there. And when you pretend to log on to their bogus logon ID, they're trying to log on at the same time. And when Google Workspace or Microsoft 365 tells the bad guy, hey, I need your 2FA code, it pops up to you, hey, I need your 2FA code, and then you provide it, and then they provide it. And so they get around that way. That's one way of it happening. Then there's a group called the community, or they're usually called just the COM. And they, like Scattered Spider and Alpha V Black Cat and the MGM resorts attacks, they're both leveraging ways of using social engineering to try and trick users out of their MFA codes. Now, in the community's case, it's vishing and smishing. The smishing is the primary one, where they're trying to text and try to see if they can get someone to provide the code. In the MGM Resorts attack, it was actually someone pretending to be a user and in social engineering the IT desk to reset all of their MFA so that the threat actor now had the right app with the right codes, everything on their phone themselves, so they could go ahead and log in with an already compromised account. So the idea here is they were just finding different ways of trying to get around it. And then Lapsus was known for the prompt bombing, is just one example. And there's many more. Yiftach, any other press? Really, I know you're going to show a couple of attacks in your portion of the presentation, but any other sort of noteworthy attacks in the news that you'd want to mention here?
No, I think these are the most notable one that I've seen. I do want to. I think it's important to point out. I'll talk about later on that it's like every time there is an MFA bypass, we hear about that, but they are not yet, I think, as super common as one would assume, right? And I think it's we're in a real transition period. Okay, because I think in terms of actual adoption of MFA, like a couple of years ago, it was still under 20%. Now it's growing and growing. I think that we're now really witnessing a period in which attackers now take for granted that there is an MFA for remote access, for web applications, for RDP, and they adjust their techniques accordingly. I think in the last 3 months alone, we've heard a much more attacks that involved an MFA bypass than the whole, I don't know, last 3 or 4 years combined.
Yeah, that's a good point here, and that's also becoming. We're hearing more about it now. I think also because I'm going to say it's more socially acceptable. It's not, but I think it's because it's the stigma of let's at least let people know that doesn't give away anything. Doesn't even tell you which platform you're using, which actually brings me to a question by let's see. Stephen had asked, can MFA be set to refuse logons by a person being identified, like during non-working hours, or require a phone call? And Stephen, I think the answer is I wouldn't see why not. I don't know every MFA product that exists on the planet, but I can see lots of different policies being put in place for different roles in the organization and requiring very specific types of validation and or not allowing access out of certain hours. I wouldn't see why I couldn't. It just I'm not going to let you present a code. And if I mean, I could see it being feasible. I don't know if a vendor actually does that, but it would be feasible with just a rule, some kind of policy in place. And then obviously, if you can't provide the MFA code, you can't log into the thing you're trying to log into. So so that makes sense to me there as well. Let me go ahead and cover just a couple of things I think will help secure MFA in general, and then I'm going to hand things over to Yiftach. And I think the idea for you guys is when you start seeing all the ways that he's talking about either bypassing some different technology that inhibit MFA from really working well, some of the different actions that threat actors take, it's kind of all wrapped up in his presentation. You get a much better sense of what it is that where your risk exists and therefore what you need to do with your MFA, regardless of how extensive it's rolled out or not. So the ways to ensure MFA is more MFA. I think that's the first one. So I'm a big believer in MFA for everybody. And the example I've used, some of you have heard this before, and I apologize if you have on my webinars if I ever talk about MFA. But imagine I don't know, some big financial company, services company in New York City in the middle of Manhattan, and in the sub basement is the mailroom clerk. And the mailroom clerk has access to email and like the websites to, let's say, FedEx, UPS, and the Postal Service. That's it. They can get on like webmail and those three types of carriers. Well, all it takes is that person getting compromised and their system being compromised through, let's say, a phishing attack. And then because there's no MFA, somebody could easily then go ahead and send emails out to everybody else in the organization saying, yeah, you got a package, click here if this is yours, or or some kind of social engineered attack that people fall for, and now they've got access to a whole bunch of other systems. But if instead we had MFA, let's say at least on, let's just say Microsoft 365 in my example, then it might not be easy or it might be impossible for the threat actor to get into email and be able to send those things out, maybe. So I'm a big believer in MFA for everybody. Second thing is varying levels of assurance based on role. So it's one thing to say, just provide the 6-character passcode and that's enough. There might be some. And in fact, Charlie mentions people are the problem. So you think about the different roles in your organization and those are people. Right. And so some people just need the 6-character code, but then the other people need, I need a 6-character code. I need you to do your face thing where you look up, down, smile, and tell a joke or whatever they're supposed to do to prove that they're themselves in quote unquote in person, that kind of thing. And Charlie says ease is valued more than security. I completely agree here. And then, the offline code that's generated is probably the best balance available, short of a hard token. Obviously, a hard token becomes difficult because I have to plug it into something and that sort of thing in some cases. But the idea is if you have someone that's got access to intellectual property, maybe it's legal teams, somebody in finance, maybe they need to have two different, besides they have 3 different levels of authentication, password and 2 other ones. It just depends on the role. Those different other kinds of controls we were talking about earlier about, like, can I deny them access after hours? If those kinds of things are allowed, maybe those need to be in there as well. So maybe it's not just levels of assurance based on role. Maybe it's taking advantage of any and all policies, feature sets, it'd be very ways of authenticating people, anything based on role. And that's going to be tougher and tougher as your access to sensitive data increases within the organization. But if you're truly focused on security first and then try to find I'll call it user-friendly ways to implement that. And I'm kind of rolling my eyes as I'm saying that because we all know that if you add in just a ton of security, then it's going to not be always easy for the user. It's going to be a little more cumbersome for them, but it's about the security of the organization, period. And they just have to understand that's your role. Too bad. The phishing resistant MFA, I think, is important, something that can't be, and I think that pretty much exists across the board. I don't think that's an issue as much anymore unless someone's really new to the game. They realize if prompt bombing and that kind of thing is available, that's a problem. And so, and the additional factors that are necessary will also help with that as well. And then security awareness training, back to the comment of people are the problem, and they are. I used to be in tech marketing for about a dozen years as VP of marketing for 3 tech companies. And so my head always goes to like ads and things like that. And I remember talking to some friends that actually own a security awareness training company. And I'm like, oh, I have an ad for you, but it's a little offensive. And it's still gonna be a little offensive, so I'm apologizing up front, but I think you guys at least you'll smirk. And the ad, it's about users doing things like this that are dumb, clicking things, clicking on phishing links. And it was the ad is gonna say you can't fix stupid, or can you? And I'm not calling people stupid. I just mean more like they're gonna make mistakes. They're not security aware like we are all the time. They're not vigilant. And so the idea is security awareness training would fix that, and that's the patch, if you will. And so, as a matter of fact, let's see, Dave says every single phishing attack we've had happened because the users texted the SMS code to the attacker. Okay, so that's where training kind of comes in play here. And then I'm gonna try and say your name. I hope I say it right. Sarab, I think it's Sarab. I hope so. I hope I got it right. Asked again, what is phishing resistant MFA? And that's MFA where it's not easy enough for the user, for the threat actor to just do something like prompt bomb the user, and or just them providing a code. It's something more than that. It's a code and then maybe them pressing a button. There's a couple of additional levels that make it just, you're trying to resist the way that phishing attack and social engineering is used to obtain the second form of authentication or the multiple forms of authentication. And so vendors will call that, and they'll try to have feature sets in to make sure that they're bypassing that. And it could be literally something as simple as putting up a box that says, did you ask for authenticate, in the last 10 seconds? If you haven't, you should probably hit no, or that kind of thing. That to me would even be phishing resistant MFA. And then Mirtha says, is it something that's additionally purchased? No, it's just having feature sets that are designed to thwart phishing attack based, phishing, smishing, I should say, and social engineering. In addition to providing the normal stuff of like, let's validate you are who you say you are, and let's put multiple different levels of assurance in and multiple authentication factors. And it's just taking into account the fact that threat actors will try to abuse it. And Mirek says it a lot more tactfully than I did. I said, you can't fix stupid. And Mirek says, unfortunately, MFA doesn't solve non-human account problems. So the problem is the user. And all right, so the last thing I have on here is thinking about having additional security controls that are monitoring authentication. You heard Yiftach say the idea that logons, even with MFA, that looks normal. If someone logs on and gets the MFA and they get in, or even it's an ID and password type of authentication, there's nothing abnormal with that in and of itself. Yeah, the things like, is that from the right computer, the right time of day, and it's 2 in the morning on a Saturday. I know that, but we're not talking about that because that just standard authentication just goes ID please, password please, cool, they match. And so that looks normal no matter who does it. And so in addition to something like MFA, as you're going to hear from Yiftach, he's going to cover some places even where MFA doesn't apply. You'll need to have some other security controls that are probably monitoring authentication and then doing those kinds of things, checking to see if it's abnormal, checking to see if the methodology is odd, if the going from system A to system B is abnormal, all those things that are the irregularities that might be like, ooh, it's at least a yellow flag, if not a red one. Let's look into that some more. So so with that, Yiftach, because I think you're going to cover this a little bit anyways in your presentation, I'm going to hand things over to you here in just a second. Yiftach is going to cover, and this is not necessarily in order of his presentation, but these are the things you're going to get out of his presentation, and just focus on the bold that I've got here. Different ways attackers bypass MFA. He's going to talk about how attackers avoid MFA, and then talk about controls that help you gain better visibility into attacker authentication. And so with that, I'm going to hand presenter rights over to you, Yiftach. And while I'm waiting to see your screen, I'll let you know when I can see it. I just want to make sure that I reiterate to all of you that are watching, as Yiftach is doing his presentation, if you have questions, ask them in the Q&A box, and I will be happy to answer those. and Yiftach and I both will be happy to answer those. And then also, Yiftach, just remember, take a breath in between, I'll call it subtopics for lack of a better term, and that way I can interject a question. You can always ask, is there any questions here? And so there's even still some that I haven't entirely answered yet, but we sort of moved on, but I might answer those at the end here. But Yiftach, are you sharing your screen yet? Because I don't think I see it.
Can you see my slide?
I'm not. Let me see. Let me go on my other computer and see if I'm seeing it. Let me go back. Oh, there we go. I did see it there. Okay, so what's happening here? Why am I not seeing this and go back? I just don't see it on my screen, but I see it on my second screen here. Okay, yeah, I think we're good there, and I can see where you're at. And let's do this. The floor is yours.
Okay, great. Thanks, Nick. And and if I do get carried away admiring my own voice and forgetting to take the breath between one slide and another, feel free to brutally cut me in the middle.
Yeah, it's fine. I got you.
As interactive as we can. I just want to say, I mean, when he talked about MFA, can't cure stupid. I actually had a dilemma. There's this quote of Einstein saying there are only two infinite things: the universe and human stupidity. And I'm not totally sure about the universe. So I actually thought if I want to include this quote in my presentation, eventually I decided not to. But okay, seems like we share the same mind. Okay, so hi everybody. So let's start. Okay, so I want to start with that. Okay, MFA is an amazing security measure, and it can potentially reduce attacks likelihood to less than 1%. This is not just wistful thinking. Basically, it's based on Microsoft analysis and other vendors. Comparing users that did have MFA protecting them versus others. I think what we'll try to dive into today is understand why it's still a potential rather than reality, right? I mean, given the huge potential, the huge security potential of MFA, and MFA has been around at least for a decade, if not more. I think it's a question that's worth diving into, and it has several aspects: technology, implementation, psychology. We'll try to shed at least some light into this issue in the next 48 minutes or so. Okay. So let's talk about the cracks in the MFA protection, and I like to divide them into two different categories. Okay, this is my own classification. It's only an option. I would actually really like to hear feedback on this in a minute, but I divide into bypasses and inhibitors. Okay, bypasses means there is an MFA in place. Despite MFA being in place and active, I, as an attacker, found a way to evade the MFA protection. Okay, and the bypass usually entails interception of some component in the MFA cycle. It could be targeting the user with social engineering, phishing, prompt bombing, etc. It could be also targeting the verification process. I think Nick mentioned SIM swapping. It could be hijacking the authenticated session. We'll talk about that in a minute. And also, if we're talking about an on-prem MFA that has when you have an MFA server in the on-prem environment, we've seen actually more than a few attacks that involved compromising this MFA server by itself. So these are bypasses. Okay. Inhibitors, on the other hand, and I will give you a spoiler. I will focus more on inhibitors in this session. Are basically let's call them, these are like barriers in MFA's ability to deliver, to realize its protection potential. Okay, for example, now, in the most obvious inhibitor is the user experience. Okay, but if you're talking about the non-web environment, basically on-prem or IaaS, VMs in Azure or Amazon, there is an inherent problem of partial resource coverage. Okay, MFA doesn't cover everything. We'll soon talk about that. MFA doesn't have visibility into the overall identity security posture. It's also related to what Nick said. It's like MFA cannot operate in its own silo. We have a slide about that as well. And also, again, and most of MFA don't have, they're not on good terms with any risk engine that enables them to work in a more efficient manner. Okay, so these are inhibitors. It means that there is an MFA, but this MFA, the MFA is not enough. Okay, so then these two together, okay, they basically, I would say, this is what hold back MFA from delivering the protection that it could have, or that it promises to deliver. Here I'm, Nick. Here I'm drawing a breath and giving space to questions from your side or the audience.
No, not so much yet, except for just a question here that this is more of a comment from Dave, but I think you're going to end up just kind of addressing this. But Dave says monitoring things like impossible travel is reactive. Be awesome if we could proactively with MFA method could verify code, location, include the MFA prompt and the location, the application that's trying to be accessed. Unfortunately, personal VPNs create anonymity. So you're not going to necessarily, I think, when I've looked at your presentation, I don't think you're going to address that exactly, but I think you're going to talk about some of the other sort of the connectivity that exists with the authentication. So just kind of keep that in mind more than anything. Robert says, Yiftalk, another inhibitor, the burden of administering roles, tokens, access history, and changes, people just give up.
Totally.
So maybe that's something even to talk about here. And Robert apparently mistyped, I think, a couple of words. He says, and the difficulty of spelling correctly. So you're human, Robert. I goofed up, I think, about MAF, right? So you can screw up too. It's fine. So anyways, yeah, that's it so far. Yiftalk, yeah, keep going.
Okay, great. So again, we won't really deep dive into bypasses, but let's just get like a glimpse overview. Okay, so I like to divide it into two parts. There's the web and SaaS, right? In the web world, so the MFA cycle will always involve the web browser, right? And as a user, you'll provide your credentials to the browser. To the browser, the browser forwards them to the MFA provider that is usually integrated or works closely with the cloud IDP. Okay, that in the cloud, and then either one of them will prompt the MFA. Let's assume it's in your cell phone and not something more sophisticated, and then you verify. Okay, and then the cloud IDP will enable you access to the organizational app. And I just want to say I'm talking now about MFA in the organizational environment, not for personal apps. Now, basically, if you want to hijack, if you want to intercept the session, okay, and again, so you can go for the user, okay, you can go for the verification, basically meaning you're targeting the component in the part in which the user inserts its verification, whatever it is. Usually, it will involve compromising or targeting something in the mechanism of the cell phone. And there's also the option, and I think this is one of the more common trends that I see today, of interceptioning the authenticated session itself. Because we need to remember, MFA is multi-factor authentication, and it applies in the analogy. Okay, this is the first door of the house. Okay, I've knocked on the door. I've proved that I'm the person that I claim to be, and then I get inside, right? But once I'm inside, there's a session, right? The session has a token. If, for example, as an attacker, I have a malicious extension on the browser, okay, or I establish some other man-in-the-middle attack, I can actually take this token, the token of the authenticated session, and replicate it, copy it, and in that way, basically, I'm not breaking the MFA. I'm just waiting for the MFA to fulfill its part, because currently it's from technology aspect, there's not a very reliable way to bind the session token to the individual session for which I authenticated. So this is from the web and the SaaS world. This is mostly what we see. Now in the non-web, it's tricky. Non-web is also, of course, the on-prem, the good old on-prem AD environment that is with us, for the last 20, 30 years. But actually, it involves anything that it's non-web. Okay, like if I have VMs in Azure, in Amazon, or in any other cloud provider, in terms of authentication, they work exactly as the bare metal servers that I have in my data center. And over there, the browser doesn't play. Actually, the browser doesn't have any role. There is the login interface, and there's usually with traditional MFA, there is some kind of an infrastructure component within the environment itself. Okay, and as an attacker, usually if I want to target it, again, I can go for the user. Nick talked about lapsus attack. I think it was the lapsus attack that targeted both lapsus and scattered spider. They've done prompt jamming for users for trying to compromise the VPN their VPN connection from the external environment to the internal one. But again, I can also start with an on-prem compromise, look for the MFA server, okay, and compromise that, and that way I'm in control of the session tokens, and I can bypass that altogether. Okay, so this is, and trust me, and we can spend 20 hours talking on this on these topics alone, and these are very interesting. Okay, I think bypassing security measures are interesting. But what I want to cover, what I want to focus on, again, is not the bypasses such as the inhibitors. So before I go on to that, if there are any questions or comments or insights on this on this bypass mapping, I'll be happy to take them.
So let me see here. Let's see. Question. I will. So, okay, no, there's no questions so far. It's just Robert was asking about an AI question early on. I haven't forgotten you, Robert. Don't worry. But let's see. Prahlad says, what are the possibilities of an MFA attack if first authentication is via certificate and not via password? Or does it really come into play in your mind?
I would say, again, I have some, I have some skepticism, about all the non-password authentication promise. Doesn't really matter. Okay, I would say, let's say, if it involves an activity from the user side, so basically all the social engineering attacks that target the user apply equally, right? And if it targets any other component, again, if we talked about hijacking the authenticated session, this could take place anyway. It doesn't matter if the initial authentication took place with with password or with any automated certificate providing. Okay, so this is, of course, like generally speaking, there are many variations of non-password authentication. We won't cover them in this session.
I think that's it so far. Let's keep going.
Great. So now we're talking about MFA inhibitors, and I'm going to do a jump now, and most of them relate to the internal network. I think I would say you can say quite in quite confidence that in the web and SaaS, the MFA technology by itself is rather solid and strong. I'm not saying it's impenetratable, right? I mean, it's vulnerable to browser-based attacks, session-based attacks, but overall, that let's say the modern world, okay, of web and SaaS is overall good. We also have MFA in more inner circle, and this is the remote connection from the outside to the internal network. I would say this is not as solid as the web and SaaS, but it's rather, but it's good enough. Where things are starting to get more complicated is the internal network, okay? And we'll start talking about these inhibitors. So what are they? Why do they occur? And of course, most important, how can we overcome them? Okay, so let's start. Let's start first with the architecture inhibitors, okay? I would say, I would ask the audience two questions, okay? Did any one of you was ever involved in any operation that entailed installing agents on machines in your environment? This is question number one. Question number two, is there anyone, not in the audience, in the universe, that has actually managed to install agents on 100% of his targeted machines? Okay, if there's someone like this, I would really like you to raise a hand, because I've never encountered such a reality. So Nick, tell me if we have some if we have the smirk.
Robert says 100% ha.
Okay.
I think everyone's in, I don't know. We'll see if anyone else pipes in here, but that's kind of what we have so far.
Okay, so if there is someone like this, give me his phone number. I would really like him to help me. I know filling lottery. No, it's really once in a lifetime. So traditional MFA, when you deploy it, you have the MFA server, and you protect the actual machines with either agents or proxies. Now, if it's agents, so by definition, you'll never be able to cover all of them. Okay, it's a golden rule. Maybe some of them even could be, you know, maybe old servers, you know, that you won't want to break. Maybe you just have a really big environment. But basically, whenever I would say, if there's an agent, there's a blind spot. Okay, I think even when you're talking EDR, EPP, next gen EV, you can never get the coverage that you want. So this is one inhibitor. It basically means even if you have MFA, you have a team that operates it, you have budget in place, okay, the architecture prohibits the coverage from being full. The alternative, of course, is placing proxies in front of network segments. And in a way, if your environment is super simplistic, you know, if the topology is, you know, clear-cut, flat, it might work. Whenever it's more than that, basically you'll have network segments with proxies in front of them and ones that don't have. Okay, so this is the architecture inhibitor. It means that by definition, every MFA project starts its life, okay, with a deficit. Now let's dive even deeper. Okay, this is not our architecture; it's a technology inhibitor, and it's about protocols, access methods, and services. Now we're in the heart of the on-prem environment, right? Active Directory authentication protocols, NTL and Kerberos, don't support MFA. Now, of course, the reason they don't support MFA is not because they have something personal against MFA. It's just because they were written almost 30 years ago, when MFA didn't exist. Now, this is a critical point, okay? Because basically, when you have users accessing servers or workstations or whatever in an Active Directory environment, they do that over NTLM and Kerberos, okay? Now, it means that the authentication, that the access methods that are built directly on them, for example, like command line access, like psexec, remote partial, WMI, these access methods don't support MFA. Okay, now think, again, I'm now addressing the audience again. When your help desk guys, or even if you are part of the IT team, when you need to connect to a machine to fix something, you do that with command line. You might do that with RDP, but you know, there's nothing like good old command line. And there's actually no way to place MFA in front of that. And given that this is the way attackers operate, this is a major blind spot for the MFA, a major inhibitor for the coverage. Same goes also for network shares. You know, like most people don't think about double-clicking a network share as something that involves authentication, but it actually is. You know, when you do the double-clicking, there is an authentication taking place behind. Again, this action today is to the greater part is beyond the scope of MFA protection. And what's more, when we're talking about the servers themselves, you know, you have a server and it runs various services. If there are 10 different business apps on this server, they are divided into different services. If the MFA you know, thinks in the terms of protecting the resource rather than the granular services within, this also really degrades its ability to actually protect, because you get something that is really, instead of, you know, giving a certain app one level of protection and the other app maybe higher, maybe lower, you can say, no, I'm protecting only the access to the server. So this is definitely not good enough. And again, these are built-in disabilities with literally almost every MFA solution that you'll have out there. Any questions on that one?
Nothing yet. Just a great point about MFA versus NTLM and Kerberos from Carson. That's about it.
Cool. And just, for the sake of the story, you all remember the Uber attack that took place, I think it was, I don't know, it says here 2022. It started, by compromising, by MFA bombing, okay, to get access via VPN. But then the first step was a network share. And this network share contained a script that had the credentials of a service account for the PAM that was there. Then, from that point on, it was really like it was real downhill. All the attackers got all the passwords, logged into all the SaaS and on-prem services. But what's most important for me here is again the network share. Okay, if there was an ability to protect this network share with MFA, okay, this whole entire attack could have been cut at its roots. Another technology inhibitor, I call it the standalone MFA. I would say, actually, now I come to think of it, I should maybe I should have taken an image of sort of like the Lone Ranger. Okay, MFA is a capability, it's a tool, but there are critical visibility and insights that MFA typically lack. Okay, for example, insight into the security posture. Is this specific user, for example, does the user perform most of his authentications with the NTLM? Is he configured with unconstrained delegations? Okay, strong user, weak user. What if you don't see that? If you don't see all the, let's call it the identity security posture aspect of the user or of the resource, okay, then you can't really make the right decisions. In a similar manner, if as an MFA you cannot detect that an attack is going on, past the ticket, past the hash, weak encryption, Kerberos thing, who knows, okay? Whatever technique, if you don't have the ability to see that, it means that your the protection that you provide is degraded. And of course, and there's also one huge aspect. I mean, as we know, 10 years ago, we thought that in a couple of years, we'll all go cloud, right? All cloud native, cloud born, fourth generation, whatever. What we realize today, again, I think holds true for most of the audience here, is that we operate in a hybrid environment, right? Most of us, we have an on-prem AD. We also have an Entra or an Okta or something that manages our identities. The cloud, we have something that maybe syncs passwords between them or do some kind of connection. If the MFA doesn't have the full visibility into the entire authentication trail of the user on-prem and in the cloud, again, it truly degrades its ability to make the right decision. And when I'm talking about making the right decision, this leads us straight to the next implementation, what I call implementation inhibitor one, and this is our intrusive policies without clear ROI. Okay, I think we can all agree that MFA is the most intrusive security measure that exists, right? So, and basically, you need to be very smart about, okay, when do I prompt MFA? Who do I prompt MFA? What are the circumstances? If I don't have visibility to everything that I've shown in the first slide, I won't be able to do that. I'll just end up annoying my users. And then, on a certain point, what will happen is that the company's CFO on the airport will want to download a spreadsheet to go over in the flight, because the airports are airports. There will be bad connection. You won't be able to log in. Once he'll get off the flight, he'll make sure that no MFA is in use ever. So this is actually very important. MFA, and it's important also to acknowledge, still, there's stats about the percentage of customers, of companies, organizations that use MFA, okay? But, and these ones are increasing steadily. But if you'll check, you'll see that with the stats to talk about the actual percentage of users within these organizations, we're still low, In December 2022, it's like, what, 60 months ago? Only 28% of Microsoft users were using MFA, okay? And again, we can say, well, you can't cure stupid, but still, this is, I would say it's not just about stupid. It's about the MFA being enabled to support wise decision making that will make it more usable and more operable. Any questions or
I
comments?
got a sort of comment question from Ed. Ed mentions abolishing expiration of MFA in the same browser instance will reduce objections on user experience grounds. Are there any realistic attacks actually mitigated by expiring MFA in the same browser, where the attacker could just steal the new token again? For example, endpoint compromise, or such expiration, or is such expiration pointless friction? What's your thought?
It depends on context, really. Depends on context. It depends on the attacker's skill. I would say, I mean, I've seen companies that basically had a very annoying habit of challenge you with MFA like every 10 minutes. Okay. Again, it's pure. It's not sustainable. It's basically like saying, the most secure computer is the one that you never turn on. Again, there's a trade-off, right, between usability and security. Sort of setting up continuous expiration of tokens, I would argue that in most places, people will find that unusable.
And then there's another comment from George. George says, I expect the 28% stat from Microsoft is about their consumers, not a figure for MFA users by employees in an organization. And that's probably not incorrect. I had the stat that I showed earlier that 22% of organizations had phishing resistant MFA in place. And that was actually talking about actual business users, but there's just a commentary that came in. That's about it I have so far.
Okay, so as far as I know, again, I'll check it after the session. As far as I know, this statistic, this stat actually applies to Microsoft business users, not consumers. It's the users outside, the users out of the entire user set of Microsoft business install base. Again, I'll check it afterwards. One add another implementation inhibitor, and I call that the all admin illusion. Okay, so I would say, of course you have to protect all of your admins, but it's not only your admins that you have to protect. Okay, we have our stats that we've taken. This one, the left one is from a survey that we've done 7 months ago. We've surveyed more than 700 companies worldwide, and basically like 64% apply MFA only to specific users. Admins or users with access to sensitive data. Okay, again, only 34% said that they do it for almost everyone in the workforce, and I would say they 34% try to do it for anyone in the workforce. Okay, so this is the idea, I mean, the illusion that only the admins count. They actually stand behind many of the attacks that we see today. Also, what most companies are not aware of is that between 17% of users are what we can call unknown admins. They perform, in terms of their access privileges, the way they access resources, it's the same as your admins. And if your policy is to protect only the official admins, these one will stay outside of the protection scope. And just as I would say, something interesting, the average number of shadow admins that are created by a single AD misconfiguration is 109, and almost all organizations are likely to experience such misconfiguration within a time frame of 3 months. Okay, so basically it's saying the moral here is you can't, the price of the choice to protect only your admin users is high, too high actually. What I want to present now, okay, is a way to overcome these, I would say, at least the significant portion of these problems, of these inhibitors. Okay, we talked about the architecture, we talked about technology, we talked about the admin protection. So I want to show you what we try to do in order to, to gain the upper hand. And basically, in terms of architecture, we said, so instead of relying on proxies and agents, We're saying what we have here, this is the users accessing whatever on-prem and cloud resources through the identity infrastructure, Active Directory, ADFS, etc. We actually place I would say, our infrastructure behind Active Directory. And it means that every authentication that goes through Active, let's talk about the on-prem environment. Okay, it will be more simple. Every authentication that makes its way to Active Directory, okay, instead of Active Directory deciding by itself whether to allow access or block it, it forwards it to us, to Silverfork. Okay, and then we're able to analyze it, and if needs be, we can challenge the user with MFA. We can use our own app or any other. Okay, then we get the response, and then we can tell Active Directory whether to allow access or block that. Now, this is how does that overcome the inhibitors, the technology and architecture inhibitors that we've seen before. Basically, even if the authentication takes place over MTLM or Kerberos, it doesn't matter to us because Active Directory forwards us the authentication packet, okay? And we can analyze it. We can see the source and destination regardless if it's NTLM, Kerberos, LDAP, or if we're on the cloud, if it's SAML, YDC, if it's VPN, if it's Radius. And in that manner, we can actually cover everything. And we don't need proxies, and we don't need agents. So basically, by this, we significantly increase the coverage of the MFA, because when we say every authentication that goes through AD in the on-prem environment, we literally say every authentication. Okay, now and we'll see how it works in a minute. Now, when an additional inhibitor we talked about is the standalone, the siloed MFA. So basically, this architecture, the ability to see, to analyze, to enforce every authentication that takes place in the directories, this is actually something which is much wider. Okay, so if you have here the identity infrastructure, once you have the ability to have visibility, analysis, and enforcement on every authentication and access attempt, then you can build something which is actually very strong. You can say, okay, let's build on top of that a nice PM capability that will show me the security posture of every entity, of every user account. Let's also build an authentication firewall that can enable me to block malicious authentications, and so on and so forth. Basically, it means that the MFA that we build on that is not a standalone anymore, because it sees whatever it sees what every other it sees what every other module sees. And what I would really like to do now is show you how does it look. Okay, and we'll talk, and this is the lab that we'll use. Okay, our environment here has 2 workstations. Okay, RD61 is RD62. It's me, I'm logged into this. We have 2 servers, okay? We have an Active Directory, this is the on-prem environment, and we also have a ping federate through which we access the portal of AWS, okay? So let's start. Scenario 1, let's talk about file share access, okay? So I'm moving here. This is the dashboard of our product. And what I'll do now is I will go here to the policy page. I'll check this policy, and I say, let's enable this one. Okay, this is file share access, applies to me. Let's see how it works, and then we'll be able to understand better. So I'm double clicking this file share. Okay. Now, instead of getting immediate access, I was prompted with MFA. I will say no. Okay. This basically enables me to extend the MFA coverage to any connection to any connection that takes place from a certain machine to the network share. Now, in terms of how it works, so the policy applies to Kerberos, and destination is this file server. And when we look inside, we see that the service that it applies to is the CIF server. This is the CIF server. This is what enables you to establish a network access to files on a shared folder. Now, this is actually very interesting because now let me I will now disable this policy. You know, I would say what I think the most common way for ransomware to propagate is through shared folder. Okay. Now, actually, what I have here. Okay. So this is you see my two files here. Okay, one is called document. The other one is called important. Not very creative, but still. You can see this is documents. Let's assume that these are very important and critical documents that I have. Now, and they reside in this network share here in the here in this machine, RD16.2. Now, let's just close this. What I have here is a ransomware simulation script, which basically, when I'll click enter, so what will happen is, oh, sorry, my mistake. Oh, that was the wrong command. Okay, so what we'll do here. Now, we'll run this demo, we'll run the script. The script will start scanning network for shares to encrypt. Okay, looked here, looked there, and then found one here. Okay, if we'll go back, we'll see that these two documents are now encrypted. Okay, multiply this by 10,000 times. This is how ransomware operates. Okay, now if we want to counter this, what we can do is we can enable this policy. What we can also do, which might even more interesting, let's create another layer of defense and enable this policy as well, which will collide the file share protection with looking on the risk score of my user. Okay, now that these are enabled, oh, just a minute, my bad. Let's disable them for a minute and rewind. Let's go back to in our demo. Let's go back to where we started. Okay, we need to, of course, I mean, if we want to show that it works, we need to show that, okay, our two documents are now back to what they were before. Now we can safely enable these two policies. Okay, and now I'll try to do the exact same thing that I've done, the exact same attack that I've done before. Let's just clear the screen so it will be more cleaner. Okay, I'm running now same script. Okay, scanning network for shares to encrypt. But what happens, instead of encrypting them, I get an MFA prompt. And I'm saying, do you want to access? And I'm saying, actually, no, I do not. Okay, now, and you can see that these files, whoops, what happened here? Okay, wrong folder. I was actually able to prevent this attack, and the files have stayed intact. And when we go and this is exactly the type of access that could have never been protected before, and that we're doing, and this is what we do now. We can take an alternative scenario, okay, in which, for example, let's just again rewind everything. Let's build them back. One of the interesting things that take place in the environment. Suppose that I am, let's go here. Suppose that I want to access. Okay, so if I'm an attacker, okay, and I was able to log in to the on-prem environment, okay, and basically, I try to brute force the user. Okay, so I have the script here that mimics this type of attack. Okay, it's going through tons of passwords, of names, or whatever. And guess what? The attacker was able to find the password. But the attacker is not interested in the on-prem environment, actually. What the attacker is interested in is to access my SaaS, okay? My SaaS or my IaaS. And then with the newly acquired password, the attacker goes here, trying to send, and the attacker is inside. Now, what happened here, okay? What happened here was actually because there is no connection between Active Directory and Ping Federate. Okay, there was a definite malicious activity here. Okay, there was the brute force over command line, try to access this app. But even though it happened, the Ping Federate server wasn't even aware. Think of it, I think the best analogy is, suppose, I mean, if I want to rob a bank and I go from the outside dressed as a pirate with whole spiel and hook and stuff, so the security camera says, this man looks suspicious, don't let him inside. But then I change my clothes, okay? Instead of the pirate clothes, I wear my Armani. I go inside, the security camera inside doesn't talk with the one outside, and it sees the person that is totally legit. Okay, and this is based in this type this type of hybrid attacks. This is something that we see all the time. Now, what we can do again, if we'd like to prevent that, what we can do is something like that. We can go here and enable this policy. It basically says if you are, if it's risky access, okay, if the user Iftach has a high risk score, okay, and if this high doesn't matter, it doesn't matter if this high score was created on-prem, cloud, whatever, okay, ask this user for MFA when they try to access Ping Federate, okay. So if we try to let's roll this attack again. Okay. Again, attack runs. Okay, I have the password that I need. If as an attacker now I try to sign in. Instead of getting access, I'll be prompted with MFA. And again, I will say no. And when we go back to when we try to visit back the scenario, it's basically saying what happened here is that we equipped the MFA with the ability to understand context, with the ability to see the full trail of what's happening on-prem and in the cloud. Despite Ping Federate managing access to the cloud, in a way, it's now able to say there's a risky activity that took place on-prem, okay? Therefore, this user cannot be trusted, and hence I'll block it from getting getting access to my Amazon machines. And in a way, it sort of goes on and on because, for example, we can see all of these things: privileged users, admins with SPM, users with old password, unconstrained delegation. If I go back to the policy screen and I create a policy, I can actually use each and every one of these indicators, okay, and tell the MFA fire up only if it's anonymous IP, or if there's a credential scanning, or for a domain admin, or for interactive logon, or whatever, or for a shadow admin, or for a shared account. In a way, we are able to harness all of this wealth of knowledge, okay, and equip the MFA, let's say equip the MFA arm with a brain that can actually see everything that is going on, okay, and this is how we can overcome the inhibitors that we've just presented. And if there are any questions now, I'd be more than happy to take them.
There are a couple here. So Carson says, it's actually a question about Silverfort. So he says Silverfort interception depends on end user enrollment, and it's in parentheses in and of itself, like Okta itself, etc. How does Silverfort handle a cross requests from AD accounts lacking these enrollments? Or how does Silverfort let us audit and correct these AD accounts? I hope all that makes sense.
Okay, I hope I understood correctly. Basically, okay, I would say by default, Silverfort is able to intercept any authentication of any user. Okay, human, machine account, service accounts. For us, it's all the same. Okay, we can consume the enrollment data, you know, and drive decisions regarding policy and access from that. Okay, but any user that is created within any of the on-prem or cloud directories we support, we can do this interception and provide a protection.
Okay, and then I think that's all the questions. There's some other questions that have come up, but I think they can wait till the end. So I think that's all we have for now. So keep going. We got about 4 minutes left, by the way, but keep going.
4 minutes left. Wow, that's okay. So I would say, so this is about.
See what you can do.
Okay. Okay, cool. So if we're talking about, let's talk about the concept of making the MFA smarter. Okay. So similar to the attack surface management, similar to stuff like NTLM-v1 or shadow admins or users with old password, we also have the visibility into actual attacks that happen. Okay. Could be Kerberoasting, SMB enumeration, ASTRAP roasting, and so on and so forth. Again, you can in all of these, we call them all of these risk indicators. They are available as sort of as a policy driver. Okay, and again, and I want to show you. Actually, I know what I want to show you. So let's discard the changes. We talked about policies. I would say the way we choose. How do we protect? So, for example, let's take this policy that applies to scenario number 2. Scenario number 2, I'm the admin. Okay. Now I want to protect the admin, but if I'll place MFA on every admin authentication, my admins will kick me out. But I can be smart. I can say, listen, suppose the admin credentials will be compromised. Okay, can happen. But the source machine from what the machine that the attack will compromise probably won't be the admin's machine. Will be some other machine. So, and from that machine, he'll use the admin's password to log into stuff, right? So I can anticipate that and say, let's configure a policy that basically says, if the source is any device except the admin machine, okay, then and only then trigger MFA. What do I earn here? Every access attempt from the admin machines itself will go smoothly. It won't even need an MFA, and it really makes sense, right? Because the admin machine will, in 99% of the cases, won't get compromised. Okay, and this is how, with a bit of a common sense, I ensure that the MFA won't be prompted every 5 minutes, okay, but only when there's a substantial, I would say, substantial reasoning that this admin account might be compromised. Any questions on that?
Sorry, I was muted here. Well, no, there's a couple questions that have come in. I don't know if that's directly related there, but so like Kevin asked, for example, how are the exceptions such as shadow admins and weak accounts being determined? Let's start there.
Okay, so 2 different risk indicators, 2 different answers. Okay, the shadow admins are determined based on periodic queries that we do to the domain controller. Okay, this enables us to see the actual permissions of the users. Okay, and compare them to the ones that are in the admin groups, and then we can say, listen, this user is not in the admin group, but operates as an admin. We can say this user is not in the admins group, but it can reset the password of an admin. Okay, so this relies on This relies on querying the DC itself. What the second question was about the weak encryption.
That's correct. He was saying, oh, I hit delete after you start answering it. Just how do you determine them? How do you determine when they're those the admin accounts or the weak accounts?
Okay, so because we our technology enables us to analyze authentication packets. Okay, so we can say, listen, I mean, this is the Kerberos authentication, but the encryption algorithm is a weaker one. Okay, this is something, again, this is part of technology that we've built. We can see what encryption algorithm was used within in this specific authentication, and then if there's a gap between the algorithm that should have been used and the algorithm that was used in practice, and there are multiple attacks that can downgrade the encryption, we can spot that, alert, and trigger an MFA.
All right, and then we're at the bottom of the bottom half of the hour, but I'm going to just keep asking a couple of questions. But for those of you that need to leave, again, this will be recorded in case you want to come back and just listen to this portion of it. Happy to do that, and make sure you can have that through email, so you get a link in a couple of days. But we'll just go ahead and keep answering a couple of questions here for the next, let's say, 2 or 3 minutes here, just to make sure we try to get as many of these as we can as possible. Going back a bit here for some of the other questions, if I may. James is saying, how would this work on Cisco ISE integrations for SSH access to a switch? This would be a switch with TACACS integration for end user auth with ISE.
Okay, so it's a good question. So we have an integration with Cisco Cisco ISE. I think it's built in a similar but somewhat different manner. This is the type of thing that I would would be better explained with the technical architecture slides that I don't have here now. But you're definitely welcome to reach out, and we can discuss that offline.
All right, and then the next question here is, does this provide MFA? Jeff is asking MFA, but I think, Jeff, I mean, this is more about validating authentication. But do you basically, I think he's asking, are you supporting Red Hat Linux or is it only Windows?
Basically, we support everything. Oh, if you mean if the user account or the machine, if they're part of Windows domain, it doesn't really matter if the machine is Windows or Linux. Okay, if the directory itself, is Linux based, this is not something that we support yet.
Okay, got it. And then I'm going to murder your name. I don't want to murder your name. Ioannis, I hope I said it right. I really do. Asks, can this help with attacks on ADCS?
Good question. At least partially. I mean, I can think of some that it won't apply to. Okay, and some again, this is okay. Well, we can actually have a whole webinar on this one exactly.
Noted. Let's do that. And then Kevin just verifying, so it sounds so the tool is not only a plug into AD authentication for MFA, but scanning auditing tool to identify the exceptions used for policies. Does that sound right for you?
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Let's see. Jay says, why did the speaker, that being you, Yiftach, why did the speaker say Kerberos doesn't support MFA?
Because Kerberos doesn't support MFA. You can build an application on top of Kerberos, on top of Kerberos that will include an MFA component. For example, RDP, right? But the protocol itself, unlike SAML, unlike modern SaaS protocols, the protocol itself, you cannot plug an MFA component into the protocol itself. And this is why, for example, when you authenticate when you access with PSExec or PowerShell or WMI, that basically use the bare bone Kerberos or NTLM. This is why they don't natively support MFA.
Excellent here. I think I've got all the questions. I think there's some comments here. I didn't need a chance to read all those just for time. But again, we want to make sure we respect everybody's time. We still have a ton of you that have stayed on this long. Really appreciate you doing so. Yiftach, any final words before we close things out?
Final words. MFA is amazing. I think it's a challenge for us. to make sure that we stretch its capabilities as much as we can. And in light of the current threat landscape, where compromised credentials are by large the most lethal attack vector, I do think everyone that owns security, owns identity, or owns identity security should ask themselves, how can I make the best of the MFA protection for my environment?
Sounds good. Everyone, thanks very much for attending today's Real Training for Free session. Just thanks go out to Silver Fort for sponsoring today. Yiftach, great presentation, lots of great detail. Obviously, you struck a nerve here, got a bunch of questions here about how this all works. And if you feel like there's a part 2 here or something, or even any of you listening that you're going, hey, we didn't touch on this, or this, stick that in the comments. We'd love to hear whatever topics you'd like to be hearing next, and happy to hear that from you. And Yiftach, if you're thinking there's some other stuff you should have covered today, maybe we'll do a part 2 to this and try to cover some of the other aspects that we missed out on today just from running out of time alone. So thanks everyone for attending. Yiftach, thank you. And this is going to conclude today's webcast. Thanks everyone. We'll catch you on the next one.